fruiting season. We basically, perfect timing, started picking them at the start of lockdown, so we couldn't do much with them. But we've been picking them ever since, and there's still some on the trees now. So it's interesting. The fruiting season seems to be quite long.
How expensive are they going to be?
Who knows it? But at the moment, they tend to retail in shops for around about $120 a kilo, which works out between $1 and $2 a fruit.
Yeah, okay. So it might be more the kind of the high end, maybe the restaurant market.
Yeah, well, it seems. In Gisborne at the moment, most of our stuff's just go onto the fresh market, so people just buying them for their own use at home. Just sort of because you don't go out and buy a kilo. You only buy sort of 4 or 5 of them, so it's not too bad if you for the daily gin and things like that.
And can you tell me about picking them?
Yeah, well, picking them, when I pick them, I wear leather gloves as long as I can find, and my heavy-duty raincoat, and I sort of push my way into the trees to find the fruit, because it's like being nestled in the middle of a gorse bush, so it's pretty hard to get in there and get a hold of them.
Might explain why it hasn't taken off a bit more around the world, eh?
Yeah, I think so.
So the sort of the citrus equivalent of a saffron or a cashew or something, they take a lot of growing and a lot of harvesting, but what do you reckon? Worth it in the end?
I think so. At this stage, we're gonna see if we can grow a few more trees and give it a go. But at the moment, we don't really know sort of what trees will be commercially viable, because it looks like we've got 2 different varieties just in the ones that we've got, and so picking the best ones to plant out is also part of the problem.
What else are you growing at your citrus orchard, Poa citrus?
Well, we grow mandarins and oranges. And we also, with the nursery, we basically just grow any form of citrus tree. People will call us up, mainly Gisborne people, and then we'll just grow on trees for local orchards.
And what's your destination of your crop?
Who
buys it?
Just the local pack houses, and then they sort of send them on from there to supermarkets and things like that. Mostly in New Zealand? Yes, mostly. Well, some of the fruit does get exported, but I think it's mostly domestic.
Is mandarin season over?
It's the end of one season, and then there's another season just coming. They just keep flowing on. The sort of summer mandarins, the early summer mandarins they'll be out in a couple of weeks, and the last of the winter ones will be finishing. And 2020 has been a pretty weird year for most of us. How's it been for you guys? Not too bad. With COVID, we weren't too bad because we're quite isolated, and we just sort of have 1 or 2 workers, so it's quite easy to separate. It was sort of business as usual, but the last sort of very wet season recently has put things back a bit, but it's not too bad. Hey, thanks for sharing with us today, Ian. Good luck with this crop. You think you'll plant a few more trees, or you wait and see how these ones go first? Oh, I think we'll plant some more as long as I can bud them to survive. We'll definitely have a crack and see if we can do some more. Nice one. Good to chat to you today. Yep, no, thank you. Ian Dodgson, a Gisborne citrus grower from Poa Citrus. And if you'd like to take a look at these finger limes, there's a picture on our website, rnz.co.nz/Jessie. Not quite a critter of the week, but just as beautiful in its own way. We've got some age prior, part of the Fly My Pretties gang, for you to take us up to the news.
tō tātou. Ko te ope katoa o Aotearoa mō Aotearoa. Tihei mori ora. The New Zealand Defence Force is first and foremost a force for New Zealand. And I am Air Marshal Kevin Short, the Chief of Defence Force. I'd like to acknowledge the work of the inquiry team headed by Sir Terence Arnold and the Right Honourable Sir Geoffrey Palmer, and I welcome the inquiry's report. New Zealand's armed forces are well respected internationally, whether providing humanitarian aid, reconstruction, training, peacekeeping, or in combat. They are held in high regard for their skills, resourcefulness, their humanity, and their courage. Core to all we do are the values of the New Zealand Defence Force: courage, commitment, comradeship, and integrity. Values that are exemplified by the Special Air Service Regiment, who are the most highly trained of all our forces. I want to comment first on Operation Burnham and Nova, and then I'll comment on Operation Yamaha. As the Chief of Defence Force, I am pleased that the inquiry's report has found that during Operation Burnham and Nova, our personnel operated with proper authorisation and conformed to the rules of engagement and international humanitarian law. However, this inquiry report demonstrates, and rightly so, that we let our frontline people down through a series of organisation and administrative failings that saw incorrect information provided to ministers and to the New Zealand public. And for that, I am deeply regretful. Operation Burnham was a complex and dangerous operation, professionally planned and carried out, and involving a number of engagement with armed insurgents. One person was killed by New Zealand Ground Forces, and this action was in accordance with the rules of engagement and international humanitarian law. The report concludes that as well as insurgents, it is likely there were civilian casualties, either killed or injured, during the operation. It also confirms New Zealand's forces were not involved. The loss of life is significant, even more so if a civilian is involved in a conflict area. Where the NZDF did fall short, and where we are accountable, is in our briefings to ministers and the public, and our administrative and systems and processes, which fell well short of the standards we demand of our servicemen and women. The errors resulted in a number of mistakes over several years and saw inaccurate information about the possibility of civilian casualties given to ministers and New Zealanders. This mistake was compounded when the inaccuracies were repeated. The inquiry did not accept there was an organised strategy within the NZDF to cover up the role of Operation Burnham or the possibility that there were civilian casualties. However, inaccurate statements were made. The NZDF acknowledges and regrets these mistakes. If we are to maintain the trust and confidence of the people we serve, we must be accountable. We must be better at the way we record, store, and retrieve information, and then subsequently present that information to ministers and the public. We must be more professional in the way in which we support our frontline troops. I will ensure that this happens. A number of changes to NZDF structure and systems recommended by the inquiry are already underway, and I am committed to all I can do to prevent this kind of mistake being repeated. In regards to Operation Yamaha, I note the inquiry findings that one of the soldiers has struck a prisoner after being arrested by Afghan police. The inquiry considers the way in which the prisoner was treated was inappropriate and did not reflect New Zealand values. This is not the behaviour we expect or demand of our people. The inquiry has also made recommendations on evolving and complex areas of international law regarding detention during partnered operations. The NZDF will work closely with other agencies to ensure that our frontline commanders have the absolute clarity around detention policies and procedures when working alongside international forces and partners. The inquiry acknowledged the thoughtful and careful work done in this area, and I believe it is important that this work is maintained given the complexity of the legal issues being raised. There is no question our administration systems and processes need to be better. We need to own that and correct it. This includes reviewing how we investigate these types of incidents. The inquiry process was thorough and exhaustive, and we will carefully consider the findings to see if further changes or actions are needed. I accept the recommendations for the Defence Force made by the inquiry and will work with ministers and other agencies to adopt them, including the establishment of an independent Inspector General of Defence. I would like to also acknowledge the soldiers from the SAS and their families. For them, this report draws this matter to a close and they can now move on. New Zealand can be proud of the professionalism and integrity of our men and women serving around the world. They have earned our confidence and respect, and they deserve our support. They exemplify our values of courage, commitment, comradeship, and integrity. And as the Chief of Defence Force, I would like to conclude by restating my commitment to the NZDF continuing to uphold these values. We will continue to do better. Te tiru whakamoru, kokuri whakaramu. Look back and reflect in order to move forward. Thank you, and I'll now take questions.
Why did senior defence officials mislead ministers and the public for years?
The information that was shown to an officer in Afghanistan was a brief look at one paragraph within a report, and from memory he reported that back. Unfortunately, and I say unfortunately, there was no system put in place to actually expand on that information, check on its accuracy, and then provide what I call very accurate information to the Chief of Defence Force and then on to the ministers. So it started with an accurate account of what had occurred, and that mistake continued for a number of years.
There were further reports, though, that said that there were possible civilian casualties that were provided by Defence officials to the Minister of Defence. Defence officials had seen them. Why did they continue to say that, rule out that it was unfounded that there were civilian casualties?
Under the structure we had at the time, there were a very limited number of officers that were dealing with that issue, and the report clearly says that there was inaccurate information provided. The detail is in there. I know it's not acceptable, and I accept the findings in there. It is hard to understand how that occurred, but it did.
How can the public trust the Defence Force again, and how do we know that this won't happen again?
I do want to reiterate that the report itself found that our troops on the ground doing operations, and I believe this is absolutely for any operation we undertake, that they are professional in what they do, they are well planned, and they are in accordance with international humanitarian law and rules of engagement. Where they were let down was in the headquarters where we managed information.
Yes, so how can we be sure that this information won't be hidden again?
There is a structural change within the New Zealand Defence Force, which has reporting for the NZSAS regiment when they undertake operations, going through what any other task unit does, and it goes through Joint Force Headquarters, where there are on any one day 160 people that would look at the staff issues related to that, and the information flow through into the headquarters here. Previous to that, when this operation was undertaken, it would go from the regiment to the Directorate of Special Operations direct to the CDF. So we've included a headquarters and the staff support around that.
This isn't just an administrative or systems error, though, is it? I mean, you've got the death of a civilian child, you've got the wrongful interpretation of information that was passed up the chain, but then the exclusion of it again in another instance where a junior officer was told to delete it from a report. You've got a breach of the Geneva Convention here. It's more than an administrative error, isn't it?
There's a number of those points I think need to be separated in the answering this. I believe that the limited number of officers that had access to information and the handling of that and the way it was passed on was incorrect, and I absolutely accept that that is not acceptable for the organisation.
It seemed to be partially obscured, though. I mean, Parsons directed a junior officer to remove it from a SITREP report.
Parsons was the senior national officer at the time. He was editing the report the way he had interpreted the information he had, and was, I think, in an information bias, actually saying that's the information I had and saw a number of weeks ago, and I'm restating that.
So why was everyone along this chain blind to all the other information that indicated that there was substantial allegations of civilian deaths in this raid?
It's unfortunate under the structure we had at the time. Things were compartmentalised.
These are officers. This isn't a structure.
Yes,
these are officers, and this is how they've responded to this information, this complication in what was otherwise a professional raid.
Yes. So because of the small number of people dealing with this and the compartmentalised part of it, information flow may not have gone to those officers direct, whether it's intelligence flow through a different part of the organisation. I do believe that each step of the information flow, the officers actually believed they had the latest information and that was available. When it came to media about the possibility of civilian casualties, I believe there was an interpretation that that was a standard behaviour in Afghanistan to actually garner support from the locals and the local government. And so that was questionable at that time. What was a big failing was not investigating that further ourselves.
The Green Party is calling for former Defence Force chiefs to front up over torture allegations. Is anything being done about this?
I think you will see in the detail of the report that the chiefs of Defence Force were not informed of the information as they should have through passage of time. I also acknowledge the comment about torture. When our troops were in Afghanistan and handing over Curry Mirage as an example, they were working to Crown law legal advice and applied that absolutely the way they should have. When they handed them over to an NDS facility, they did not know that there was torture at the time. These are the troops on the ground. It was another 6 months later that UNAMA came out with a report saying this is likely to be happening, and it was ISAF headquarters that then changed the policies towards that. I want to state that our NZSAS regiment on the ground actually followed very clear instructions, legal instructions about how to handle detainees.
One of the questions raised by the inquiry, and it was repeated again this morning by the Attorney General, is that there may be a culture problem within the NZDF. You're saying it's an issue of process, it's an issue of the small number of people involved. But when you look at something like that exchange between Lieutenant Colonel Parsons and Colonel Kelly, where the report says there should have been red flags going off in Colonel Kelly's head, that never happened, is that a culture issue?
I think we need to be far more inquisitive about the information and question the source documents, the source of the material. I accept that. I think as a cultural issue, one of the things that we need to be is more transparent in what we do. And at times, I know we are seen as not transparent. Usually it's because we don't want to give away our tactics, techniques and procedures, because that gives us an edge. We hold classified material close and we don't share that. And so there is a culture in our organisation of not disclosing, not talking about those issues. But that should not stop us from being very open about what we do and how we're doing it in a general sense with the public. And I think that cultural start, which is close down, keep it tight, is part of the problem.
And has that changed? So are you concerned that the same kind of incident could take place today?
I am not as concerned. I would never say that it couldn't happen again. I believe the structural changes, though, and the organisation changes and procedures we've put in place, both within the office of CDF, should absolutely eliminate those issues happening again.
Will you be looking at who exactly within the Defence Force, all of the senior officials who were involved in passing on this information, and whether or not any of them are still working for the Defence Force? Will they be keeping their jobs?
There's a very limited number of people still serving from 2010 in that particular operation. I note that the inquiry itself doesn't recommend any follow-on inquiry process, investigative process, but I have instructed the Director of Defence Legal Services to review the findings within this report and to look at disciplinary and administrative processes to see if there is follow-up action that we need to take.
Considering the findings of this report, though, do you think there are grounds for them to stay?
Well, I'll let the investigation, one, detail of the report, and two, any follow-up investigations to decide that.
Can you be clear who will be investigated? Because there are a limited number of names in that report.
The investigation will be based on the information, and I'm going to say clarified new information that's in the report. I'll let the Director of Legal Services provide her commentary and review on that to me. I don't know what the outcome would be, obviously.
Can you say how many staff are being investigated?
Anywhere that the review has a finding.
The inquiry recommends, the inquiry recommendations call for independent oversight. How comfortable are you with that?
I'm very comfortable with that. If that gives more trust and confidence in the New Zealand Defence Force and what we do, and then I welcome it.
Did the New Zealand Defence Force push to have the report watered down or have anything removed?
No, we did not.
How concerned are you about the appearance that it seems like for some matter of time, because of these compounding problems or compounding lack of information, that civilian control over the military was not what it should be?
The civilian control of the military, I believe, was there. Where we let the ministers down is the flow of accurate information and information that didn't mislead what was going on. And that's a significant fault of the senior leadership at the time, senior officers. I believe we have systems and processes in place to actually absolutely minimise that going forward.
You said you're regretful, but you've been in a similar situation to these guys. I think you were a PRT commander at some point. When you were reading this report, what were you thinking in your head when you were seeing these emails and knowing, more important, not what was said, but what wasn't being said?
Initially surprised with what I was reading in the report, and then absolutely regret that that could happen in this Defence Force. I'm part of that. I've grown up with that. I understand the way you should report and the accuracy of those reportings. I have to admit, though, when I was in the PRT, it was a different command structure and process that we used. It was more open, used all the staff within the Joint Force Headquarters, and that's why there's been a change in reporting for the NZSAS.
Brigadier Parsons, he left the Defence Force in approximately April, I think. Was he pushed? Did you ask him, or did anyone in the Defence Force ask him to leave?
No.
It was not.
He was offered a job at about the time. In fact, he was meant to spend longer in London as the head of the defence staff over there. He was given an offer for a position back here in New Zealand and came home for that. He was not asked to leave. There was no part of that at all.
Did you reveal a portion of the inquiry's findings to him?
The inquiry through Natural Justice were keeping him well informed about what they were writing.
So he knew what the report would say.
He knew what the draft writings were. Only this morning did he see the report itself.
Do you think that influenced his decision to leave?
You would have to ask him.
It's taken
taken almost a decade to get to this point and for the truth and the findings, I guess, to come out officially. Are you sorry?
I'm the opposite. I'm pleased that this report has come out, because to me it bookends what has been a long period of allegations and trust and reputational issues. To me, this bookends that, and I think that's very important for the NZDF and those people within it.
Right. The Attorney General this morning said that senior defence staff made terrible mistakes. Do you apologise for those?
I do apologise for those.
What about
I am deeply sorry for those mistakes that we should not have made.
What about New Zealanders whose trust may now be, I guess, shattered by the findings of this report? What's your message to them?
To New Zealanders, I've got a very strong message, and that is that the professionalism and integrity of the men and women who serve in the New Zealand Defence Force is exactly where it should be. You can trust them, you can rely on them. They are very professional in what they do. There is the question, though, in the way we dealt with this on an information flow process, and to me that's quite separate to the way our men and women perform in the field, in their operations.
Can I go over just a couple of points in your thing? You say here that the report concludes that civilian casualties as well as insurgents. Importantly, it confirms New Zealand forces were not involved. You call it administrative systems and processes. Part of the whole legacy of this and some of the saga of this was the statements made by Defence Force throughout this period, the contesting of what the book said, all of that. There was a lot of distancing language used by the Defence Force throughout. Here you're saying that New Zealand forces were not involved in those deaths in the raid, though SAS soldiers signed off on the use of the Apache helicopter. Are you still distancing the military from this?
No. In the detail of the report itself, they use those words. We, each of the operations and how our, in this case, men operated was within the rules of engagement and international humanitarian law, and there was no question of the way they actually performed.
I'm not saying that they pulled the trigger. No one's saying that. The report doesn't say that, But there's to say New Zealand forces were not involved seems to make it sound like they were totally absent in the moment,
No,
they were very much there.
They were there.
Yeah,
yes, they were. And the ground force commander, on occasions, gave clearance or not to the helicopters to fire, and that was based on, in fact, clear statements, as the report will show, that they had identified insurgents, that there was no collateral damage, and that means buildings and civilians, and that the ground force troops were not in the way. They then said, if you meet that requirement and you meet your own rules of engagement, you can fire.
So why are statements like this here, like it also confirms New Zealand forces were not involved? It gives a different impression, doesn't it?
Why
not be more upfront, is what I'm trying to say.
The report itself goes in, probably in the summary of the way it's been written, but the report itself shows the roles of the air assets and the ground assets quite clearly in what they did. The report itself did not comment on other international operations within it.
Going forward, will you commit the Defence Force to being more transparent and upfront and, in its public statements about what's happened?
Yes, I will, within, and I do have to put a little caveat on it, within what I'll call the detail may not be all there, but I do want to let everyone know that being more open and transparent is very important for the Defence Force. And this report says that in spades, and I think we need to. We need to, where we can, be very open about what we do and how we do it.
Do you think there'll be any ramifications for, or any sort of implications for the comments in the inquiry that say, New Zealand's actions breached the Geneva Convention, the policy was inadequate around the torture of detainees?
It was a very complex piece of law that was discussed in the in the report. It's some 60 pages of that report talk about the Geneva Convention and other findings. I want to say that our Defence Force and our people abided by the direction they had, the legal direction they had in 2010, which came from the Crown Law. Since then, and it's a decade, there's been a lot of change in the law and how it should be applied. And I know that there's ongoing work to be done there. It's one of the main recommendations to look at how we deal with detention and detention policies.
Do you agree, though, that with the inquiry that it would have been reasonable for when Defence Force staff on the ground discovered that this insurgent was likely being tortured, that they should have raised it, that ministers could have been briefed, that some reflection on whether they were acting in accordance with both principle and law should have occurred?
I think through the inquiry process it showed that we handed them over to NDS
Which was
detention.
notorious for torture.
There was suspicion of that, but not proven. We actually got what I call a detailed report of that some 6 months later, after Kari Mirage had been handed over. For the men on the ground, they did not know that.
What are the direct consequences for the Defence Force for breaching the Geneva Convention? Will it be facing any?
I don't believe they will. We'll have to look at the work that comes out of the detention policy, but at this stage, no.
Just on that, Kari Mirage was put there 6 months later, you got the report. Were other detainees handed over to the NDS after that report was held? There was some 200, I think, weren't there, that were handed over?
There was a change in policy from the International Security Assistance Force, ISAF, headquarters about where detainees could go and where they could be placed.
So that, in your mind, that nullifies that concern?
No, that was their direction about meeting what was a report from UNAMA about how detainees should be, how they should be held and where they could be held.
So beyond that point, New Zealand troops were not handing over detainees to the NDS?
We were still in partnered operations and that would have happened. Right. But I don't know which facilities they would have
So it's possible some of them could have been tortured and some of them couldn't have been tortured?
It's possible.
In terms of the creation of a new office of the Inspector General, would that require a culture change in that soldiers, military personnel would feel comfortable or should feel comfortable to break the chain of command and become whistleblowers?
Well, I welcome the Inspector General because of that independence. The concern that we may be holding on to information or not sharing, I think having an independent organisation that does that, that understands us, I welcome that.
So in terms of that independence will only work though if people are willing to talk to them and aren't just handing it off to their bosses and hoping that their bosses bring it to them?
There are several ways that individuals can report incidents within the Defence Force, not just on operations, and the Inspector General will primarily look at the way we operate on operations, or on the request of myself, the Secretary of Defence, the Minister of Defence, as examples. Individuals within the New Zealand Defence Force can go through the command chain. They have a non-disclosed way of reporting. They can go to the Ombudsman, and they have a number of individuals within our bases and camps that are paid for by us but independent as well. So, and there's an 0800 reporting number as well. So we're opening up, and they have been in place for a while, a number of independent ways of actually reporting if they do not feel comfortable going through the command chain. We want to give them confidence, though, that is, to me, the best way to go. But if that doesn't work, they have other avenues.
Have you spoken to anyone from the current government, Ron Mark, Minister of Defence, since this report has come out? And have you provided your assurances that the Defence will improve and will, I might just quickly put this back up, but will make changes? I might, if you just waiting until I put this back up, sorry.
It's going to be good B-roll.
Yeah, it will be.
But a noise.
Sorry, everyone.
Until earlier this week, there weren't any major discussions about Op Burnham. Our minister wanted to let the report be written and run through. Until earlier this week, we hadn't mentioned the outcomes. Since we both had copies, we still didn't go into detail. In discussion with our minister, he said we will discuss this for next week when the findings are fully out and discussed.
One thing that came out during the inquiry in the documents, I'm not necessarily sure that was in the report, forgive me, I haven't read the whole thing yet, but was that after Hit and Run came out, the book, certain defence staff flew around the world to try and gather evidence to combat the allegations in the book. Do you think that was appropriate now on reflection?
I think it was, you said to combat what was in there, is actually a task set by the then CDF Tim Keating to say, please see if we can get more information to verify the allegations, whether it's true or not. I think it works both ways.
Some of the language in those emails, and you'll have to take my interpretation of it, but some of the language seemed to indicate that they were very much looking to quash the allegations in the book, that it wasn't so much an investigation or a verification process.
Well, the book revealed a number of points and potential sources that said these allegations are true. The CDF at the time wanted to verify whether there was whether that was true or not.
Right. The next time a documentary,
just stick it in the middle.
next time there's a documentary aired with such serious allegations or a book released, do you think it would be appropriate for the Defence Force to wait another however many years for an inquiry to be announced? What should happen differently?
No, I think the Inspector General is the solution to that, where that independence means they can look at the information available. They don't have to look at any process within the NZDF to occur. They can look in and actually do that investigation. I think when you look back, the New Zealand Defence Force relied on a number of investigations that were being done by ISAF to fulfil our own requirements, our own belief in the information we had at hand. An Inspector General through that process would probably have a different view.
You should have investigated at the time though, right?
At the time, we took an independent incident assessment team result and said that verifies that we did everything as we should have.
But when more information came to light, I mean, there was by the point the documentary aired, for instance, there was no look to
there was. In 2014, for instance, there were a number of investigations initiated, including a military police investigation into the allegation of Curry Mirage being beaten up. So that was investigated at the time.
Right, but there was no outcome when it wasn't made public, is it?
I'm not sure whether it was made public or not, sorry.
David Parker said this morning that the inquiry's findings would likely damage the Defence Force's reputation. Do you agree?
I agree that it's damaged our reputation as far as the headquarters and information flow. I would like to reiterate, though, that I hope it hasn't damaged the reputation of our men and women who actually undertake operations, because I think the report has clearly stated that they operated with professionalism and skill.
Has Defence Force hierarchy, including your predecessors, have they failed the frontline staff?
We have. We haven't met their standards. This report shows the high standards that they operated with, and we did not match that here in the headquarters.
So
we let them down.
So what is your plan from here? What exactly will happen next?
We will be doing two major things. The first is we will have that look through our legal services at the findings to see if there are any disciplinary or administrative processes that we need to go through. And second, we're obviously working with the government and other agencies to meet the requirements of the recommendations. So just two more questions.
In everything you've said here, you've been giving us sort of a message to New Zealanders, trust integrity, you can trust us. What do you say to the staff that you have failed?
I think standing here, this is a message to our people as much as anything else, that I accept responsibility for poor management of information, and in particular letting down our ministers and government. You know, we should provide them with full information that doesn't mislead them, and that's a fault that we need to correct here in the headquarters. If I just make a final statement, and I think that New Zealand should be proud of the men and women in the New Zealand Defence Force. They are professional, they are skilled, and they serve you well. Thank you.